Just down the hall, at another House hearing, the top executives of the nation's 5 largest oil companies faced day 2 of questioning after their appearance in front of some senators yesterday. The dog and pony show continued, with executives laying some of the blame for the high prices on the federal government and not allowing oil exploration in certain places like offshore waters or in a wildlife refuge in Alaska. James Rosen following this again for us tonight. Those executives had to sit there today while lawmakers called their salaries, quote, obscene. Got a bit heated, huh?
Yeah, it did indeed, Shep, and never more so than when the California Democrat Maxine Waters challenged the president of Shell Oil, John Hofmeister, to guarantee the American people the prices they pay at the pump will go down if the oil companies are allowed to drill wherever they want off of U.S. shores.
I can guarantee to the American people, because of the inaction of the United States Congress ever increasing prices unless the demand comes down, and the $5 will look like a very low price in the years to come if we are prohibited from finding new reserves, new opportunities to increase supplies.
And guess what this liberal would be all about? This liberal will be all about socializing, would be about basically taking over and the government running all of your companies.
The word, obviously, that Maxine Waters was looking for there, Shep, was nationalizing the oil industry.
Wow. How did Shell Oil answer that one?
Basically by saying, we've seen this movie before. It's called Hugo Chavez and Venezuela.
All right.
Cut 2, go.
We need to continue to boost domestic production of oil and gas. Last year, American oil production reached its highest level since 2003. Let me repeat that. Our oil production reached its highest level in 7 years. Oil production from federal waters in the Gulf of Mexico reached an all-time high. For the first time in more than a decade, imports accounted for less than half of what we consumed.
So that's all I can take. Now listen to that. Does that make any sense to you whatsoever? His government is affirmatively shutting down areas of the country and offshore where we can develop oil, explore for oil and gas, and get it. So doesn't this sound a little counterintuitive to you? Well, it is. It's a big lie. It's a fraud. So I did a little digging. EnergyTomorrow.org. Kyle Eisenhower. This is where Obama's getting some of this crap from. Last week, he writes, Interior Secretary Ken Salazar told Congress that oil production in the Gulf of Mexico remained at an all-time high, I'm quoting, and we expect that it will continue as we bring new production online. He claimed in 2009 there were 116 rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. In 2010, in February, 120. In February 2011, 126. But Salazar's numbers distort the true number of working rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. I said working, producing rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. According to Baker Hughes, 4 days before the Deepwater Horizon accident, there were 55 rotary rigs actually drilling oil, for oil that is, in the Gulf of Mexico. On May 28, 2010, when the administration announced the 6-month moratorium, there were 46. Last week, there were 25. So let's see. There were 55. Now there's 25. But what they did is they just counted the number of physical rigs, even though they don't have permission to actually be drilling anymore, to lie to you. To lie to you. So the fact that there is an all-time high number of rigs in the Gulf ignores the fact that most of those rigs aren't producing. Claiming an increase in idle rigs in the Gulf as a success story is like claiming the job market is great because a lot of people are unemployed and available to work. In the same hearing, Salazar also claimed that, quote, the production has remained at an all-time high. You just heard Obama say that. Within the Gulf of Mexico, and there's no way to actually make this true. The Energy Department, his own Energy Department's Energy Information Administration reports The production in the Gulf of Mexico is in decline, forecasting a decline of 250,000 barrels a day from Gulf production due partly to the moratorium and restricted permitting. And while the annual production figure for 2010 was greater than 2009, the agency's month-by-month production figure shows a peak in May of 2010 and a relatively steady decline since. Now, the petroleum engineer, the EIA, that is the government's petroleum engineer, Gary Long, told trade publication E&E News that the rig count in the Gulf was cut in half after the Deep Horizon accident and that it wouldn't rebound to previous levels until the end of 2011. And that's only if permitting processes increase. But they haven't. They've approved one. Over at American Solutions, they address some of this too. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important that I take the time with you to unravel the propaganda that's coming out of this government, and specifically this president. Because you're sitting there scratching your head when hearing what I played or hearing him earlier today. Wait a minute, production's up? There's more rigs than before? I thought Levin and the others were saying it's a lie. Because they're playing with the statistics. Obama said, we can't escape the fact that we control only 2% of the world's oil. Over at American Solutions, they say this is a common refrain among anti-drilling Democrats and environmentalists, and it's repeated enough that many people accept it as true. In reality, it's 100% false. The number comes from a highly conservative estimate from the Energy Information Administration, listen to this, totaling America's proven reserves where we are already drilling. It does not include the 10 billion barrels available in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It does not include most of the 86 billion barrels available offshore in the Outer Continental Shelf, most of which Obama has placed under his drill banning. It does not include the 800 billion barrels of oil we have locked in shale in Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado. Those shale resources alone are 3 times larger than the proven reserves in Saudi Arabia. So the claim that the U.S. only has 2% of the world's oil is a lie. Obama said industry holds leases on tens of millions of acres, both offshore and on land, where they aren't producing a thing. He said that today. So Obama adds this whopper by saying he wants to encourage companies to produce on the leases they hold. Now, this sounds like a common sense fix, doesn't it? It's actually, excuse me, it's actually just blind rhetoric, reserved only for people who are ignorant of how drilling works. A lease is for exploration and production, not just production. And because oil is not equally distributed across the globe, one parcel of leased acreage may not hold any oil. Moreover, due to the circuitous and needlessly complicated permitting process, that is the Interior Department, you know, it can take years for companies who own leases to complete their exploration activities. So to get to the production phase, it could take as long as 10 years. And ironically, Obama wants to tax companies for not producing on their leases, even if the federal government's obstructing their ability to explore on their leases. You listen to this show, you'll know more than anybody else, I promise. One other thing. Obama said today, last year our oil production reached its highest level in 7 years. You heard it. I just played that. This is nonsense. Obama is deliberately trying to take credit for actions unrelated to his policies. The increased level of production is due to the actions of previous administrations and the production in the Dakotas, where most drilling is occurring on private land. By contrast, the Energy Information Administration projects there will be a decline in production of almost a quarter of or 220,000 barrels of domestic oil per day in 2011, and in 2012 will produce 150 million fewer barrels in the Gulf of Mexico, all because of Obama's policies. So the increased production is due largely to, remember those two oil men? Bush Cheney. But it's going to go down because at some point we need to explore further. We need to tap other sources in the ground. We won't be able to because of Obama-Biden.